Well, hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Dan Ellis. I serve on the board for Atheists of Utah, and would like to welcome you all out today to listen to Shannon speak. I'm really excited. This is a fun topic. Something
he says.
I've always been. Yeah, well, it's fun in an interesting way. But yeah, I wanted to thank you all very much for coming out today. If you don't know and haven't read all of the details of this, Shannon Inglet was born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah. She earned a doctorate degree in pharmacy from the University of Utah and currently practices as a medication safety specialist for a large Utah hospital. Her favorite people in the world are her wonderful husband and adorable 2-year-old son. Her favorite canine is a Doberman named Tesla. It's a very cool name. Shannon enjoys traveling, cooking and eating, and running marathons, which facilitates more cooking and eating. I've got half of that down. I need the other part of it. But thank you all very much for coming out. I'll turn the time over to Shannon, and we'll have a Q&A session after her speech. So welcome, and thank you very much. And thank you, Shannon.
Yeah. Hi, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for coming out and spending your Sunday with me. Thanks for the introduction, Dan. Sorry, a little bit of this will be redundant, but my name is Shannon Inglet, and I'm really happy to be here today to share my story, which I've titled Big Love, Big Lie, Growing Up in Polygamy. When I was first asked to speak, I was a little apprehensive. I was scared. But I realized that if my story can help to educate, inspire, or even just entertain you nice folks, I figured I should share it. Especially since April, if you're not aware, is National Child Abuse Prevention Month. Now, I do have 2 disclaimers before we dive in. The first is that I am not here to spread hate or prejudice. I'm just here to share my story and my personal experiences. I've learned that there is every kind of person in this world, and people can be terrible, with or without religious fanaticism providing justification for their actions. The second disclaimer is that I've spent a good 16 years trying to forget and repress many of my childhood memories, so bear with me if a little bit of it is hazy. Now, given the title of my talk, you already know a little bit about my past, but let me tell you a little bit more about who I am today. Dan already told you a little bit about that, but I live in Sugar House with my wonderful husband of 7 years and my 2-year-old little boy, both of whom I love more than words can say. As you know, Dan already mentioned, I work as a pharmacist, and to do this job, I spent 8 years in college to earn a doctorate degree. I also did a postgraduate year of specialized training. And I love running. I've done 12 marathons, training for Lucky 13 this summer. I did the Boston back in 2010 when I was in much better shape. And I love traveling. I've been to 12 countries on 4 different continents, and I'm proud of my little boy who's accompanied me to 4 countries now. He's getting little stamps in his baby passport. I love my life. I am probably the luckiest person I know. But it was a hell of a road getting here. I was raised in a polygamist community. I'm pretty open about this, so I don't exactly tell every person I meet. I have a few coworkers in the audience. Thanks for coming, guys. They were a little shocked, I think, when they read about this on Facebook. But you're here now, and I'm happy to share all of it. I actually told my now husband the first time we ever saw each other socially. He still asked me out on a date. A few years later, we told his parents when we got engaged, and I wasn't in the room at the time, but his mother's priceless response was, "But she seems so normal." She didn't know me that well, I guess. But most people typically have the same reaction. They lean in and they say something like, "That is so interesting." And it was. But it was also terrible. And in retrospect, so much of it was just ludicrous to the point of hilarity. So, lean in, and I'll tell you all about it. The opening line of Anna Karenina by Tolstoy is, "All happy families are alike. Every unhappy family is unique in its own way." Mine was a uniquely unhappy family. My father had 2 wives and 17 children. He believed and practiced a principle observed by many early Mormons in the 1800s, including the church's founder, Joseph Smith, after Smith had a revelation in 1843 that polygamy, or plural marriage, was the sacred promise of God. This revelation declared that women are given unto him to multiply and replenish the earth, and for their exaltation in the eternal worlds, that they may bear the souls of men. It's a very high and prestigious calling. After much friction with the U.S. government, though, in 1890, the then President Wilford Woodruff officially banned the practice, and Utah was allowed to join the United States in 1896. My father and other fundamentalists, though, will cite an 1886 revelation, which was said to have been received by the third president of the church, John Taylor. Sorry for this history lesson, but it's good context. It's not recognized as authentic by the mainstream church, of course, but this revelation, which is in John Taylor's handwriting and in first person from God himself, states that God has not, in fact, changed his position on the subject, and the new and everlasting covenant is binding upon my people. And since that time, multiple fundamentalist sects have splintered off of mainstream Mormonism. Now, if you've ever met a polygamist, I'd probably tell you you've met a polygamist. You see, there is a broad spectrum of polygamy. Everything from the creepy cult-like compound dwellers of Colorado City to the sneakers and nylon hosiery with whoosh hair ones you see shopping at Reams, to the more chameleon-style ones who actually blend in pretty well to modern society. I was fortunate to have been born into one of the more chameleon-style families. And I think my mother is the main reason for this. My mother was actually not born in polygamy. She was raised in the Mormon church. Why she married my father, I will never quite understand, though truth be told, my father could be very charming and charismatic. People who met him in social settings would tell me so, and it would drive me crazy. My mom met my dad when she was 18. She was finishing high school. My dad was 20, working on a business degree. They got married soon after and had 10 children together. I'm number 6. By that point, my mother was a quiet and obedient wife and homemaker who never dared speak back to my father. I remember her hiding credit card receipts so that he wouldn't find out how much she'd spent on certain luxuries, like groceries. We went to Sunday school every week with other polygamous families, mostly cousins and relatives, for as long as I can remember. To say that we lived our religion underground would be quite literal. We actually held our meetings in the basement of my uncle's house for years. Sacrament meetings, Wednesday night fireside meetings, even weddings where men were sealed to their non-legal wives took place here. No, everyone in our family circle seemed happy. They always had smiles plastered to their faces. We sang hymns and bore testimonies about how they knew this was the true word of God. We'd hear lessons and talks from traditional Mormon texts like the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants, and some more esoteric texts you won't find on the shelves of Siegel Book and Tape. But men were priesthood holders, the only way for a woman to get into heaven. And they all believed this wholeheartedly. It's what they'd been taught since they were children. Growing up in a house filled with so many perpetually young children and noise, it could be incredibly difficult to earn any kind of positive attention. My father used to call the house every weekday between 4:30 and 5 p.m. to announce he was coming home from work. And we children implicitly understood what this meant. We frantically cleaned up our toys and washed dirty faces, lest we run the risk of being punished, getting in trouble, usually just without yelling, but the occasional belt strap. I remember being yanked out of bed once by my ear to clean up toys that I left outside in the yard. I was wearing my very favorite pink pound puppy nightgown, and I cried the whole time, but I learned an important lesson in how to stay out of the way. It was actually pretty easy to be overlooked since I was surrounded in the birth order by 4 older brothers and 1 little brother. It was not a secret that males were far more esteemed, and they got more attention and were more invested in. The one thing I did have going for me, though, was my brain. I was a pretty smart cookie, not to brag. And I could memorize a Book of Mormon verse and an historical date like a snap. I mean, I was really more like a party trick, but my parents would give me the faintest little glimmer of positive reinforcement, and I just ate it up. I craved more. As a little girl, I just wanted someone to tell me I was loved or at least valued. And I think all little kids are like this. And when we're little, our parents are our whole worlds. But my father made a singular and profound error in raising my siblings and me. He let us go to public school. School, where my teachers told me I was smart and good and that I could do things. I remember wishing I could live in my kindergarten classroom or go home each night with my teacher, Mrs. Fox. But I knew this was impossible. And honestly, at that age, I still believed what my parents told me, that we polygamists were special. We were chosen by God to live his perfect law. We lived in the world, but not as part of it. We had a beautiful secret, but a secret all the same. I couldn't tell anyone at school about it because they wouldn't understand. And in fact, they would probably hate me for being in this chosen and elite group loved most by God. No, I must go into the wicked, wicked world, learn some basic reading and writing, but I must also cherish my faith and my blessed birthright. No, I really believed this. And I worked very hard to keep my parents happy by living this way. But I also wanted friends. I wanted the approval of grown-ups like my teachers who taught me new things and new ways of thinking. Don't get me wrong, it was Utah in 1990, so the ideas weren't all that progressive or new, but gradually I got to the point where I knew someone was wrong. Was it my parents, cousins, other polygamists, or everyone else? When I was 10, my father held a family meeting and announced that God had spoken to him and that he was taking a second wife. He was 40. She was 22, 2 years older than my oldest sister. But you can't argue with God's law, right? I was too little to get it. I remember being excited, like I was getting a new big sister. I know that's disgusting, but that's really what I thought. As I got older, though, I realized more and more of the reality. My mother's youngest daughter and wife number 2's oldest daughter were actually born 2 days apart. I don't like to think about that. Anyway, it became harder and harder for me to convince my friends at school that I was normal. I had an aunt who moved in with us, and she has a couple children. It gets hazy. Yeah. In our home and behind closed doors, life was not always sunbeams and giving streams. My mother never said anything overtly negative about wife number 2, of course. Maybe just a passive-aggressive comment here and there about how she was too skinny and maybe she should eat something once in a while, especially when she's eating for 2. But the dynamic was shifting. I was young, but I noticed certain things. My father basically moved out of my mom's room and into wife number 2's. My mother, and another passive-aggressive move, painted her room pink. And more precious moments figurines populated it in my father's absence. For me, I just wanted to be normal. But there were so many absurd little details that I was constantly trying to keep hushed. I was never allowed to wear shorts, ever. When I was very little, I remember not being allowed to wear short sleeves, but my dad slowly gave some leeway over 10 years of Utah summers. But he himself never did, actually. My father always wore long sleeves and pants every single day. I wasn't allowed to play sports. We didn't celebrate most holidays. After all, they're steeped in wicked pagan traditions. We did get presents at Christmas, I think again because my mom had some cherished childhood memories of her own. But we never had a tree or decorated, just a nativity scene on the mantelpiece. The truth, anyway, Joseph Smith told us, is that Jesus' birthday really, you guys ready for this, is April 6th. So I hope you all had a very Merry Christmas. I have never been trick-or-treating. Ever. That may not outrage you guys, but I still am really bitter about it. So much candy I never got to eat. I really don't understand secular Easter at all. Like, it's fun, I guess, to dye Easter eggs now that I'm a grown-up, but I don't understand that. Or what are peeps? Are those actually edible, or is everyone playing a trick on this poor polygamous girl? I don't know. Anyway, on the rare occasions we went out to eat, at McDonald's, for example, my father would make us all say a blessing on the food in public before we could eat. And let me just say, no praying will ever make a happy meal nourish and strengthen my body. It was mortifyingly embarrassing, and I really have no idea how I managed to make any friends. But I did, and I was terrified every single day that they would find out the disturbing truth and shun me. I know all teenagers go through something like this, but I gotta believe mine was a little bit worse. A strange juxtaposition, or maybe contributing factor to my own insecurity and concerns, was that my father was actually obsessed with image. his image, which we, his children, projected. Now, this may seem counterintuitive since many Christian-based faiths, fundamentalism included, teach us that vanity is a sin. But then again, they also preach love and forgiveness, but we can talk about that later. Like so many things, my father had twisted this into a different concept. Those who are obeying God's laws are blessed. So if we are righteous, obedient servants of God, then we should be beautiful, shiny people. And if we weren't, well, this reflected poorly on him. This is true. My father teased me about my weight frequently as a little girl. He once joked that I should avoid wearing bathing suits because they made my butt look big. That's not scarring for a 12-year-old girl to hear. He commanded my little sister to take an iron supplement because her complexion was too pale. Weirdly ironic. My little brother was cute and chubby before his early high school growth spurt, and my father belittled him relentlessly. He actually forced him to do sit-ups in front of the entire family every night before our family prayer. I remember the exact moment I realized the possibility of what I now consider my truth. That there is no God, and my parents are sorely misguided. I was 13 in 7th grade. I'd been upstairs being berated by my father for wanting to go to a girlfriend's birthday party. I went downstairs into a pitch-black basement to my room, and I reached for the light switch. But my arm actually froze in midair on the way to the switch. But it felt like a light went on anyway. What if? The thought wasn't like, aha, or even pleasant. It was scary. It was like waking up from a happy dream only to realize I was on a tiny life raft in the middle of a dark ocean. I didn't flip the switch. I got into my bed and I just thought more about the possibility down the rabbit hole. But the scariest thing of all, to me, it made sense. So began my full-blown living a double life. I went to Sunday school every week, pretending to believe the absurdity of it all, reciting tomes like a trained parrot, but taking refuge in weekdays at school, being with my friends there. I was probably the only kid who didn't like weekends. And I was absolutely drawn to science classes. Finally, concepts with clear logic and reasoning and evidence. When my chemistry teacher exploded a hydrogen balloon on my first day of class, that was it for me. I was a born-again science nerd. Science still delivered. My resentment toward my father and wife number 2 grew daily. Wife number 2 had a job, and she left her children at home with my mom and me to raise. I babysat so much. Wife number 2 would come home with toys and candy at least once a week so that they didn't forget to love her. And I watched, one by one, as my older siblings left home. Well, getting kicked out is far more accurate, but clearly unable to accept my father's teachings either. They left with nearly nothing. Some clothes, some memorabilia. My brother literally left holding everything he owned, or was allowed to keep, in a 2x2 grocery store banana box. My mother would always be crying in another room, and my father would always be yelling. Like his righteousness grew the louder he got. I remember arguing with my dad about not being allowed to go to a school dance. My older brother was allowed to go to dances because apparently males can convert females, but a female could never bring a righteous man into the community. Let's be honest, that's one less life for the leaders. But he was yelling at me, "Why? What do you expect to find out there?" I could never actually argue with my father. I could only either stare at the floor while he yelled at me, but this time I replied softly but firmly, "Love. I just want unconditional love." I was holding back tears. He silently turned his back but didn't leave the room. Instead, he went to his bookshelf and pulled a volume of a polygamist writing comically titled The Truth Volumes. He turned right to a page he must have known very well, pointed to a paragraph, and told me to read it. Now I have to paraphrase, I don't remember it perfectly, but it said, "Love is not unconditional. It is conditional on one's belief in God and obedience to his principles. Only those who obey God can be loved and love others." And it got darker. I didn't know all the details when I was younger, but 2 girls I was close to in this community were also victims of sexual abuse. Those are not my stories to tell, and I don't think I have any right to do so. But I mention it here because I think it's an incredibly real and devastating reality in many polygamous communities. Women and girls are acquisitions, property, not people. These 2 girls tried to come forward and were dismissed and ignored. One of them would see her abuser sitting in the same room every Sunday. Her with no voice, him with no guilt. I overheard my father say to wife number 2 about one of these girls that it served her right. And I'll never forgive him for that. I knew I needed to leave. I needed to escape this poisonous place. I loved my siblings, and I knew how much it hurt when my older siblings left me behind. I played Monopoly and video games with my siblings every Sunday. We confided in each other, but there was no other way. Unless, of course, I wanted to marry the man my father had already picked out for me. He was only 6 years older, and I would get to be a first wife. Anyway, my birthday is in September, so I was 18 early in my high school senior year. And there was an unspoken precedent that my father wouldn't kick us out until we'd at least finished high school. I knew I needed to graduate. I had thankfully already been accepted to college with a scholarship, but the clock was ticking, and my terror rose with every second. I still had this ingrained fear of my friends rejecting me if they knew the truth. I was absolutely trembling when I made the decision to tell my very best friend, Rachel. We'd been friends since 5th grade. And I couldn't get through the words without breaking into a sob. But Rachel patted my shoulder and said quietly, "Oh, honey, I know." Wait, what? Everyone knows. What? I'd been so thorough in my lies. I'd covered my tracks. But it didn't matter. Lo and behold, miracle of miracles, my friends supported me, and so did my older siblings, who had paved that bumpy, arduous trail, but a trail nonetheless, before me. After graduating high school, I moved in with my older sister, and she welcomed me, even though with 10 years between us and the fact that she moved out when I was 8, we barely knew each other, but she took me in. We have actually a joke in my family that she runs the polygamist halfway house. I wish I could tell you a heart-wrenching tale of my actual exit, but I remember very little. Scary little. Like, my little brother will say, "Remember when you moved out?" And I'll be like, "No." And I'm not sure if it was so traumatic that I repressed it, or if it was maybe something I'd seen coming so many years in advance and seen so many times in my own head. But I left. I told my parents I did not believe what they believed, and I could not live the way they lived. And it's only been recently, since my father passed away last year, that I've actually gone back to that house. I know that in many ways, my childhood contained many of the same struggles most children go through: insecurity, doubt, rebellion. But in many other ways, it was far more difficult, abusive even. I know that there are more disturbing and devastating stories on the evening news, and my own pales in comparison to so many of those struggles. But children shouldn't have to go through such turmoil and pain. There are so many sad, dark things that I carry with me that really have no business being there. This is National Child Abuse Awareness Month. I don't often think of myself as a victim of abuse, but that's because I've spent so much time forgetting and overcoming, and I have come so far. But I shouldn't have had to. No child should. Children are the most wonderful, promising thing in the whole world, and they deserve every good thing we can give them. I often wonder how my father reconciled his actions and decisions. And now that I have my own child, I understand him even less. I would do anything for my son. His giggles melt my heart. He reminds me of all the possibility that life has to offer and every good and right thing in the world. And my father never met him. My father never knew any of his 13 beautiful grandchildren, or really any of his own 17 children. To my father, we're sons and daughters of perdition, the worst kinds of sinners, the ones who shunned the highest principles of God. And that is a shame, because in spite of him, we've become amazing people. Statistically speaking, at least one of us should be in jail. But my siblings include a PhD electrical engineer and researcher, a neurosurgery physician's assistant, small business owners, a law enforcement officer, one's in grad school studying biology, one's just accepted to law school, and the younger ones have so much potential. And believe it or not, some of us older ones are actually good and loving parents. But I also know we all carry scars. Abuse isn't always visible on the outside. Sometimes it's almost imperceptible, even to its victims. My father left behind a legacy of pain and unyielding hatred. Maybe, especially because I'm an atheist, I believe we should do everything we can for our children. All children, because they are our legacy. No matter what you believe, I hope you'll agree. Heaven, hell, nothing. I won't be here. You won't be here. Our children are the ones who are going to carry our memory and our stories with them. I only hope that mine and yours are ones that leave an enduring and positive legacy of love. Thanks, you guys. If you guys want to ask me questions, please do. Don't be shy, I'm very open.
Were you raised in the valley here?
Yes. I grew up in South Jordan. Our church was mostly in South Jordan and Sandy.
What high school did you go to?
I went to Bingham. Yeah. Go Miners. Yes.
Is there any resources for you when you came when you left the church or you left your polygamous community? Are there resources now for girls looking forward to?
That's a great question, and I don't really have a good answer. For me, I didn't know of any. So I just called up my sister and said, "Hey, can I live with you?" And she was amazing. My sister at the time had 4 kids of her own. So my poor niece Ashley got kicked out of her own bedroom and had to bunk with her sister, and I took it over for a time. But it's a great question. There may be resources through, I don't even know, Adult Protective Services or some other organization, but I didn't know. I didn't know and I don't know, sorry. Dan?
Was your family part of a small cluster was it an individual church, or was it more spread out across the state or a nation, or was it just, a select few people who were part of that?
That's a great question too. The funny thing is it actually changed quite a bit over time. There's a lot of intermarrying and a lot of, we're all kind of related some way by blood across the state, but our particular group was mostly a small local cluster of my father, a couple uncles and cousins and things like that, second and third cousins. But I don't know all of this, but my older sister, who's 10 years older than me, she didn't go to public school until middle school, and so all of her elementary school education was actually with the Allred family. So.
Yeah, that was going to be another one of my questions was, we hear about the Allreds, or now I can't think of any of the other big family names that are associated with polygamy here in the state, and I was wondering if your family was any part of any of the bigger names like that.
Yeah, we weren't, thankfully, the scary ones you hear on the news, we really didn't associate with. There probably is some family relation at some point, some marriage somewhere that we're related, but we really didn't. I don't know, I don't want to name drop or call people out, but there were some weirder families that I remember when I was little, we hung out with some Barlows and some Naylors and some Nielsen's, and we kind of decided to go a little different direction than them. I don't know all of the politics. It's actually strange to me. I was so young, I didn't understand that there were like politics and some really like heated disagreements on weird, sub principles that they just couldn't get along on. And so there was just this splintering effect in just different groups. Yeah.
So your texts that were, your religious texts that are there other groups that use those, but you just kind of use them a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know who's publishing these things, but they were, and they were like these texts that like our great grandparents had like handwritten, and then like someone whipped out a typewriter and like typed them up, and they would just get passed down and reprinted, and so a lot of them were in common. Like I know like the Truth volumes was one example I mentioned in here. They were like this, I think like 20 different volumes of different articles and newsletters that were published by the early church leadership, and a lot of the men in our church, our Sunday school, had copies of them. So yeah.
Did all of your siblings end up leaving, or did some of them stay?
To date, all of them have left. It's very strange now that my father has passed away, which I can tell you about too if you really want to know, but to date, no one stuck around there. So my sister left when I was 8, and then my brother 2 years later, and just kind of down the line. And there's kind of a broad spectrum too. A couple of my older siblings joined the Mormon church, and they're active and happy in that. Others are just kind of spiritual, but not part of an organized religion. So just kind of across the spectrum. Yeah.
Did your mom get everything, legally speaking?
No. Yeah, okay. It's been so messy, so messy. So wife number 2 has 7 children who are all of the young kids from, from 23 years old and 21, 23 has moved out, 21-year-olds down to 3 years old. Yeah, it was tough. I feel the worst for the little kids. But anyway, no, since wife number 2, they're her children. So she collects Social Security on behalf of them. She actually remarried and is already the second wife of another man. She got remarried 4 months after my father died. She's a real quality human being. And she really, I'm convinced, took her children with her for the Social Security money. But like I said, people can be terrible people without religion being involved in that. But it's, it's torn my family apart in many ways, I guess. Thanks, Dad. Do you have a question?
So, like you said, your friends were aware of what was going on, and like maybe your neighbors or teachers. Was there any like law enforcement who was like checking up on your family? Was there like a threat from your father about that? If you lived like in Salt Lake City?
Mm-hmm. There never was, for me. It wasn't really like a physically abusive environment. And so it never escalated to the point where law enforcement would ever get involved per se. It's maybe something of it had to do with we lived in a small, quiet cul-de-sac down a dirt road with our neighbors were my 4 uncles. So, but it really probably never escalated to that point anyway. And I think if anyone were to call Department of Child, DCFS, they would probably come in and just be like, well, your parents aren't on drugs or overtly neglecting you, so parents have the legal right to mess up their children. More questions?
Yeah, so I guess I wonder how you got to the point of realizing that like you as a woman had just as much worth as, like, was that something you talked about like in high school in classes, or how did you come to that?
Oh, I love that question. I don't have a good answer to where it started. I've always been a very logical, rational person. And when I was little, it drove me crazy that my brothers could do things I couldn't. It just drove me crazy. I just saw the inequity in it, and I was like, this is not cool. And, I was still allowed to go to school and I was encouraged to learn. And I don't know, it just was common sense. It's like, why can they do things that I can't? Because I'm every bit as smart as them. Just isn't it right? And I do remember we had a Sunday dinner once with the leader of our Sunday school sect. And I don't remember how old I was. Maybe I was 12 or 13. I remember him asking me something about my future. He was intending for me to say who do you want to marry? And I remember saying, I'm going to go to college. And the look on his face was priceless. I still remember it. But no, I don't know really a good answer. When I got older, I actually adored women's studies, and even though I was working on a chem degree, I took 3 or 4 electives about women's studies and women in history and things like that, because I always thought it was such an interesting topic, just knowing that they probably felt that way too. Maybe not so much maybe in a religious sense, but kind of the same struggles, just in, way before me. Thank you. That's a good question. Yeah.
So on your mother, there were some tremendous challenges for her also.
Yes.
Now your father had passed, and the other relationships have gone through changes. Have you or any of your siblings been able to reconnect with your mother? Has she stayed very aligned there, or has she drawn more to connect with her friend?
This sounds terrible, but I'm so excited for her, quite honestly, because she would probably view herself very differently than what I'm describing, but in my mind, she hasn't been allowed to be a real person in 40 years. And so I'm honestly excited to see where she goes and how she grows from here, because she has. When my father passed away, we had not had all of us siblings in that house, or even at the same time, in well over a decade. And we all came home. We were all there. And I think my mom felt a lot of support there and was like, oh my gosh, my children will still be here for me, even though I didn't do anything when they left. And so yeah, I'm honestly excited. She still has very good relationships with other polygamist families and that group. And so I really don't know. I think she'll probably stay very close with them, and I don't really know where that will go, but I think she does, at least right now, she recognizes that she has children who love her and support her, and, so.
So has she ever attempted to get to know the grandchildren, regardless of your father's choice not to?
She actually has. She has. My father would never go out with her, but she would go and visit the grandkids at my older siblings' homes, and she would always we'd either go to her at some neutral location or my brother's house or something. We'd always get together for Christmas, and she always has gifts for her grandkids. So she definitely tried to have as much of a relationship as she could, given the barriers. But yeah, my father refused to do that, and he would never accompany her.
So even with in the growing up years, to go back, did your mother maintain relationship with any of her nuclear family or her relatives?
That's a wonderful question too. I considered putting some of that in my talk today about her. She wasn't super close with her own siblings, and that probably faded a lot after she did marry my dad. But my grandmother was actually a really positive influence in my life. Her mother, my grandma, she would come over, I don't know, every week or couple weeks or something like that, and I think she was kind of checking in, making sure all us kids were okay and being looked after and taken care of. And she was always so encouraging, and she would give me $5 for every 4.0 report card I got. So my mom definitely maintained her relationship with her own parents. But I also know it was really rocky. Again, just being little and being shielded from it, I still remember seeing certain things, like my grandma did not like my father so much, for probably obvious reasons. And so I do remember shouting arguments and unpleasant phone calls that resulted in my father just hanging up the phone, kind of thing. But they stuck in there. I think they were pretty determined to remain in my mother's life too, I think is a big part of it. They were not willing to let her just go off completely.
That's got to mean a lot to her too.
Yeah.
But from it's such an interesting study or perspective in power and the use of control and power.
Oh, yes.
So as you have evolved and developed a healthier what I would perceive as a healthy relationship with your husband and your child,
yeah.
do you find that there are there still things that you're understanding or that you can start to untangle and deal with?
Yes. It's taken me a long time. But no, there were so many very obvious and just, routine power plays that my father had. He controlled the bank account. My mother didn't work, so he monitored funds very closely and always was holding it over her head and asking why she'd spent so much on something. So money was definitely a tool of power for him. For us kids, he did not want us. He never let us have a car, so we couldn't leave our home without, friends would come rescue me and pick me up and things like that. But we weren't allowed to have cars, and he never wanted us to have employment either. I went ahead and got a job when I was 16 anyway, and he did not like that very much, but I got the job with my best friend at the time, so we were able to go to work together, and she would drive me. So that's the only reason that worked out, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do it. But he was very, very angry when I got a job, because that was, again, something that one less thing he had over me. And for me growing up too, in my adult relationships, it was really hard for me I didn't ever want to be a victim of being powerless, if you will. And so it was hard to me to realize, this person loves me. They're not really doing this. It's not a power thing at all, despite, I have this gut reaction that, no, I have to have my own bank account. I actually did have my own bank account for the first 4 years. Me and my husband were married. We didn't get a joint bank account. So I was like, I'm not doing this. It's mine. And I have too much debt anyway. And then when we had our little boy, when we found out we were pregnant, I was like, okay, we can have a joint bank account. We got a lot of baby furniture to buy.
Yeah. Or seeing your friends outside of school, was that allowed? Don't you come to your home or you come to their home?
That's a great question too. I never really wanted them to come to my house very often. They did now and again, and that's probably why they were fully aware of my home situation before I actually divulged it. But no, I definitely preferred to go to their homes, and my very best friend, she just lived kind of up the street, maybe a mile away, kind of thing. So even without a car, I could walk or take my bike or something. So I was able to go hang out at her place pretty often.
So as far as entertainment goes, were you normal entertainment, or is it more?
I mean, I definitely tried to be normal. I listened to, pop music and things like that. The only CD my father had was the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and I think an Andrea Bocelli CD. Other than that, it was but I definitely tried to just be a normal teenager. Books and movies. I loved going to movies. Just having fun and being a normal kid. I never really got into trouble is the funny thing. I was I wasn't a 4.0 student, but I was pretty darn close. And I really wasn't doing anything bad, but just being out there with friends. My father, I don't even know what he thought I was doing. So he was not okay with it, but. Yeah, I'll start right here.
Just kind of on a related thing with having friends, I know that a lot of us here who are atheists, if we were not associated with the LDS Church, because it's such a big organization that has so much influence here locally, I know that a lot of kids are ostracized by other LDS families. And I'm wondering, in your experience, if you felt that same sense of being ostracized from those LDS families, because you said that some of your friends were aware of your family's situation. And how did those other Mormon families, if you had friends that were LDS, how they reacted to that, and if they didn't want their children playing with you and your siblings?
No, I was lucky enough not to feel that a lot, but I do remember at least one time that I was aware of not being invited to another girl's birthday party because I was not in the Mormon church. And I don't know exactly what her parents thought that I was, but they knew I was not in the Mormon church. And I never pretended to be because, well, I wasn't. Even for me, that would be, I'm not a good liar, and that would have been way too far. But, so people knew that I wasn't in the Mormon church, and you're right, there was a little bit of backlash for that, but I only remember that when I was really little. I think over time, I think it got a little bit better. I remember there was actually 2 Catholic kids in my high school, and I think it got a little, that's diversity in South Jordan, Utah. But no, I don't know. And maybe honestly, part of it is that people knew what my family was, and maybe some of it was a little bit of pity, to be honest. I don't know. Maybe they're like, wow, they're uber Mormon, so they should definitely be on the guest list. Just teasing. Sorry, there were more questions?
Thank you for your big talk.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I was wondering if any of your siblings kept their faith, or maybe kept a version of faith, and how they managed to decide on the evils you see.
I'll get to the evils part after, but no, it's a broad spectrum, honestly. None of them obviously stayed with the polygamist idealism or ideas. A couple of my siblings stayed in the Mormon church. Really only 2 of them stayed with the Mormon church, and the others are just, kind of, I think they believe in God, but I don't know that they've kind of put a formal title on it. I think in conversations I'd had with them, I think they consider themselves spiritual or maybe agnostic. But it's kind of across the board. In terms of dealing with what they've gone through and experienced in life, it's also kind of across the board because everyone's experience was a little different. I definitely think my oldest sister had the hardest time. There was really no one before her to help her out of her situation. And she went through a lot more than I'll ever even know about. And she still struggles even to this day. She still, I don't know if she's in counseling, which she probably should be, but she definitely needs some psychotherapy, some SSRIs and things like that to help her cope with what she's dealt with and is still dealing with. And I think she definitely still carries a lot of emotional burden from her experiences. And I can't speak to my brothers because they don't talk about stuff like that. Sure.
What was the dynamic between siblings from the other sister wives? Was it all just a big happy family and you're all just seeing kids together, or was there a little bit more of a us versus them with the children from other wives?
That's a wonderful question. Honestly, so I moved out, let me think. Wife number 2 only had 3 children when I moved out. She might have been pregnant with a 4th, but I was gone before they were kind of old enough, really. I just didn't really see the dynamic that well, at least being there in the home. But externally, like seeing it, at least now, it's wonderful. Everyone is really close-knit and really, really supports each other and confides in one another, and just, they're really just good emotional supports for one another. Yeah. It's actually really nice to see the camaraderie with my siblings, because, well, my brothers were not that awesome to me, but they were boys. So most of the children, actually the younger ones from wife number 2, are girls. So I think they're all pretty close. Yeah.
What can we do to find other people like you and help? And yeah.
ask, I guess.
Are you a polygamist?
Well, not like that. Not like that. I think, no, it's tough because there has to be, I think the toughest part is someone in this polygamous community, like if you're there, you first have to realize that it's something you don't want. And if you don't realize that, you don't want help and you're not going to even try to reach out. So I think that's the hardest part. I mean, you grow up and you're taught from day one that this is true, and if you don't believe it, you're going straight to hell. It's hard to even think about other possibilities, but I don't know. If you come across a person who has, I don't know, it's just so hard. Like, I think, you know, I hear the stories too about the people who live in like Colorado City and those kinds of communities that are like, you know, they try to like literally escape. And I don't know, there may be organizations or something like that where you might be able to help or make a difference. But I think just as a broader life advice question, just if you don't feel like something is right, like if you feel like maybe there's something weird or unsettling or you're just uncomfortable in some kind of family situation, maybe ask in a tactful way, not are you a polygamist, but maybe ask in a tactful way, and maybe it's not even polygamy. There's just so many other things that could be going on. Or, you know, you can actually submit anonymous reports and tips and things like that on the DCFS website. I considered doing that with wife number 2. But, yeah, in the back.
You mentioned earlier one of your siblings grew up more, were educated with the All-Reds. What difference do you see in their worldview, outlook on life, ability to adapt? Where are they now? Did they leave? I think you touched on it a minute ago.
Well, she was my oldest sister. So, like, even though it was something it was her elementary school education, they were still, what she's told me about it, so I guess it's just been so far that she's kind of way over it now. So she's pretty much just a normal, wonderful person. And that really didn't shape her worldview other than not anything more than you know, the middle school and high school years, I don't think. But it was kind of different. So I think they taught, like, you know, reading and writing and math, but then they would have like an hour of, you know, Book of Mormon reading and other things. So it was certainly different. And I don't know, I would guess lower quality education than your typical public school, but I don't think it's had any kind of lasting effects. She honestly has told me they were, like, even as a kid in elementary school, she's told me they were so weird.
So I'm curious about your dad's family of origin and why it took that long to take a second wife. Is that typical?
No, it's a great question. I know so much less about my dad's side of the family. My grandpa did have 2 wives and was definitely practicing polygamy, and so my father was raised in it. But I think the legend that I've been told is that when my dad met my mom, he told her, like, this is what I believe and this is what my family practices and I want to live this too, but I think he essentially promised her that I won't take a second wife, that I don't think this is God's plan for me. And that promise was communicated to my grandmother, and that led to all sorts of bad feelings when he decided God told him to take a second wife. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Maybe one more question. There are any?
Back there?
Follow-up question on the question of how do we help. So I guess you addressed his question about talking about adults. I'm just wondering, where's the justice for the children, like your siblings, for instance? So how can we help them? Is law enforcement attempting to help families like that, or is it something more than? And how do you feel about that? Do you feel like your parents had the freedom to raise you that way, or you should be more proactive with how we?
No, that's a wonderful question. It really, it's tough. I struggle with it, honestly. I think that it's not fair what parents necessarily get to do, but at the same time, if there's no legal recourse. If there's nothing like overtly like illegal that they're doing, they're not physically harming or abusing the children, there's no overt neglect, things like that, like, then there's no grounds for law enforcement to do anything. And so it's tough because I don't think there's good laws for emotional abuse, for example. And it was actually my husband who said, when we were talking about all this just garbage that happened after my dad passed away, my husband said, parents have a legal right to mess up their kids. And so it's just unfortunate, but, you know, there's just not good laws that way. So, I don't know. Again, I think oftentimes there's way more going on in a home than we know more about. So like I said, in terms of helping, I think just don't turn a blind eye when something strikes you as unsettling or just something isn't quite right. I think it's better to at least try to get law enforcement or DCFS involved, just in case there could be something more and darker and scarier going on.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah, once again, thank you very much. Another round of applause for Shannon. Thank you. And thank you all so much for coming out today. Atheists of Utah sponsors talks like this once a month. You can follow us on Facebook, on Meetup, out on Twitter. If you have any questions, any other talks from anybody else that you would like to hear from, be sure to let us know, reach out. We've got a bunch of other activities planned all the time. You can find all of the information for those events and activities out on those locations that I mentioned earlier. But thank you all very much for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend and that you enjoyed this talk. Also, there are still cookies up here, so come and get some cookies. And thanks again, Shannon. This was awesome.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.